Joining me now, Jim Hansen, Executive Vice President of the Center for Security Policy and the author of Cut Down the Black Flag, a plan to defeat the Islamic State. They said they were going to bomb ISIL. It sounds like they didn't. Would they have been actually telling the truth about being on the same side if they went to fight against the same people the United States is?
Well, they have no interest in doing that. They're there for one reason. Russia loves its warm water port. Russia likes its puppet of Assad, and they're there to kill Assad's enemies and any civilians who happen to be around, because they're not doing precision strike bombing. They're basically just flattening things. So, I mean, it's not a net bonus for anybody who wants to see less civilians killed in Syria. It's a bonus for Assad, who is going to survive. I think the problem we're running into is this is another example of President Obama seems to think that a great strategy for that region is outsourcing to tyrants. He outsourced the fight against ISIS in Iraq to the Iranian mullahs, a tyranny of a theocracy, and now he's going to turn it over to Putin in Syria, and I don't think the aftermath of either one of those is going to be good for the people who are going to be crushed under the military might of those two organizations.
Well, we had already outsourced running Baghdad to the Iranian mullahs, so not too much of a stretch to outsource going after ISIL in Iraq, at least on the Iraqi side of the border. This to imply that Obama had a lot of great choices in that regard, I'm not sure that it necessarily fits the facts.
Well, I think the situation is we didn't act. We left a vacuum. We left a vacuum that ISIS filled. We left a vacuum by failing to provide support for the Baghdad government that the Iranians filled. And now we did nothing in Syria. We drew a red line and then pulled it back, and Putin filled that vacuum. It's a natural facet of the big game of power is vacuums don't last. Somebody will move into them. And in this case, the people who moved in are not good guys by any stretch of the imagination.
Gentlemen, stay with us. Syria is not a Lebanon, vest pocket country, but it's not enormous. When you've got modern air forces, and many of them flying around in there, is there a real risk of something going wrong in a way that really ends us all in deeper trouble if there's not deconfliction talks?
I think the danger of aircraft hitting each other without, worrying about who's who is less of a problem than the targeting on the ground. We've got people there, all right, we've got assets there, we've got friends there, we've got allies and frenemies there. The Russians don't know where those are, and the Russians are bombing who they want to bomb. Deconflicting the targets and the targeting boxes would be a much better thing, but we can't do that because the Russians aren't our friend, they're an enemy. So the real problem is there's an intelligence cell now in Baghdad where the Iraqis, the Iranians, the Russians, and the Syrians are all sharing intel. Well, we share with the Iraqis, which means our intelligence about who we've been working with, i.e. Assad's enemies, is now quite likely to flow to the Russians. They're going to squash them flat, and we've got people trying to help them. That's a little scarier than a couple aircraft getting into a dogfight.
Jim Hansen, when the smoke clears, is Bashar al-Assad still in charge?
Putin seems to think so, and if I had to choose, sadly, between he and Barack Obama to see which one's going to blink, I'm pretty sure Obama will blink. So I think we have capitulated to the idea that Assad will stay, and potentially at this point, as I mentioned, we've outsourced strategy there to Putin. Now, in a painfully and horrifically pragmatic way, if Putin decides to go against ISIS, he can destroy them in ways we won't. Part of the problem in Iraq in our fight against ISIS is our rules of engagement and the restrictions on airstrikes stop us from being as effective as we could be. They've already proven, the Russians, that they are not going to abide by that. So if they do decide that Assad is safe and we assent to that, and then they do take the fight to ISIS and AQ and al-Nusra and the other bad guys there, they could put a painful whooping on them. Unfortunately, a lot of civilians will die too.
As of today, is this a longer war?
It could be much shorter. And there could be a diplomatic solution, and the only card we've got left is to tell Putin that we'll accept Assad now, move him to Crimea, in 6 months or so, and pick a tyrant of your choice to replace him so you can keep your stuff. But it could also kick off a much larger war, because right now you've got Russian troops coming if they're not there yet. You've got the Shia troops moving from Iran across the Sunni part in a not too distant future, and that could flare up into a Sunni-Shia hot war.